With me today, I have a special guest, Alison Feigh. Alison Feigh is the director of the Jacob Wetterling Resource Center, a program of Zero Abuse Project. In her 20-plus years of missing children advocacy, she works with students, parents, youth workers, faith leaders, law enforcement, and the media to help prevent childhood abuse and abductions. Parents and educators and caregivers, 3 red flags to watch for. What would they be in your opinion?
The first one is isolation. We tell parents we want to build a safety net around kids. Who are the 5 adults that your child can talk to if they have a problem? Who are the 5 adults where if your child's having a bad day, they can go to? We want to say 5 because sometimes it's the person on the net who's causing the harm, and we have 4 more people. Sometimes we're embarrassed to tell dad, but we might tell our soccer coach, whatever it is. We want to build our 5. And once that net is built, that safety net's built around our kids, we want to pay attention to anyone who's trying to separate our kids from that net. In a lot of our cases, parents will say afterwards, there was something about that person that just gave me the ick. Or there's something about that person that just seems so creepy. I could never put my finger on it. With little ones, it's like that mixing bowl feeling in your tummy. If someone makes you feel that way, I, as your parent, want to know about it. You don't have to have a good reason. If someone makes you feel that way as your partner, I want to know about it, right? If we're like at a family reunion, this person just gives you the ick and you can't figure out why, tell me so that you and I can make a plan to be extra cautious with our kid and not leave them alone with that person. Patty Wetterling always used to say that hope is a verb. It's not used to say, like she still says it. Hope is a verb. If we want to hope that the world is better, we got to roll up our sleeves and get to work. Hope isn't passive. We don't hope for kids by laying back and just, passively hoping things get better. It's about rolling up your sleeves and finding action steps to do that. And so that's been something in my life. I see hope as such a powerful word.
Welcome to Iron and Empathy, the podcast where we explore what it takes to build strong, resilient teams in high-stakes environments. I'm your host, Drew Moldenhauer. Iron and Empathy is proudly sponsored by Blue Ethos Specialized Training, a national leader in workplace violence prevention, active threat preparedness, and de-escalation training. At Blue Ethos, we don't just focus on safety. We help organizations improve workplace culture by strengthening communication, increasing situational awareness, and creating environments where people feel supported, empowered, and prepared to intervene early before problems escalate. Thanks for being here. Let's get into today's conversation. With me today, I have a special guest, Alison Feigh. Alison Feigh is the director of the Jacob Wetterling Resource Center, a program of Zero Abuse Project. In her 20-plus years of missing children advocacy, she works with students, parents, youth workers, faith leaders, law enforcement, and the media to help prevent childhood abuse and abductions. Alison's work also includes writing curriculum for youth-serving organizations, training professionals about online challenges kids face, and advocating for families of the missing. She is the author of 2 children's books and co-author of a textbook, Sex Crimes and Offenders, Exploring Questions of Character and Culture. She was awarded the 2024 Visionary Voice Award from the National Sexual Violence Resource Center. Alison was also awarded the 2025 Distinguished Alumni Award from St. Olaf College in Northfield, Minnesota. Thank you for being with us today, Alison.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. So, Alison, just to kind of kick things off here, what originally drew you to this work that you are doing now? And was there a specific moment that made you realize this was your life's mission?
So I grew up in central Minnesota. Jacob Wetterling and I were classmates. When you hear about it's interesting when I'm in different high schools and I'll ask high school students, how many of you have heard of the case of Jacob Wetterling? There's not a lot of hands that raise. And then when I'm doing like PTA presentations, every hand in the room goes up. It's just one of those sort of generational things. But I grew up with Jacob Wetterling. Jacob Wetterling was abducted when we were in 6th grade. And different people handle trauma in different ways. Different classmates, different friends handle it in different ways. For me, the more I learned about things, the less freaked out I get. That's just I like read to fix. That's how my brain works. And so I was a 6th grader in the public library in St. Cloud being like, librarian, where are your books on sex offenders? Like, I heard on the news this might be a sex crime. Like, what is that? Where's the card catalog for that section? And they're like, this is a 6th grader, you have a parent permission slip, but this feels like a lot. So for me, I was the middle schooler reading John Douglas, FBI profiling books on family trips. My brother's just being like, can you be normal for 15 minutes, please? But it was my way of processing the trauma. It was like, I want to make sure this never happens to me. I want to make sure it never happens to anyone else I love. These cases are so, so rare. They happen about 100, 300 times a year, but I don't want it to ever happen again. And so what do I need to know as now as a parent, as a youth worker, as someone involved in prevention? What do I need to know? So it started as a kid, just as like a way of self-preservation, of trying to make sense of an unsenseless thing. And when I went to St. Olaf, I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do, what I was going to study for my undergrad, what I was going to do for a job, sort of what my passion was. I have a big interest in community theater. I'd done a lot of directing and choreographing and performing as a kid. And I was like, maybe I want to do theater, but I don't know if that's really where I'm being called. And I took some classes my first year that kind of whittled down for me. I really want to be involved in crimes against children, preventing them, responding to them, something in that realm. I wasn't quite sure what it was. So I met with Patty Wetterling, who is an icon and remains one of my favorite people in the world. She was our PTA president when Jacob was taken. And I kind of sat down with Jacob's mom and I said, I'm really interested in working in this field, but I'm not sure where. Do you have any suggestions? And she got me just going. She got me going. And so my first internship at the National Center for Missing Children in DC was where the moment for me of like, there's so many good people doing so much good work. We're getting ahead of this. 95% of kids are found. Like and you just see all these professionals working day in and day out to help keep kids safe. And my internship there was sort of the solidified moment of, I don't know what this journey is going to look like, but I know I want to prevent crimes from happening to kids. And I know I want to be there for families when crimes do happen.
Awesome. And, I think about that. And just to your point, I'm 41 now. And I remember when Jacob was taken when I was very young, and I grew up in Ramsey, Minnesota. And that was, national level news. And to your point, that kind of makes me laugh as now I teach classes and my students coming up, like you said, I ask them, the Jacob Wetterling, and I forget that they're quite a bit younger than me. And a lot of them don't know what I'm talking about. But that was the case at that time when we were younger. And it was one of those ones that really set a precedence for this. So that's phenomenal. For listeners who may not be familiar, can you explain the mission of the Zero Abuse Project and why this work is so critical right now?
The Zero Abuse Project is a nonprofit that wants to end child abuse. That's the work that we do. Victor Veith has written a document of how we can end child abuse in 3 generations. And here's what we need to do. And here are all the steps that we need to take. And so we have folks on our team who are just all doing such amazing work in their different areas and together collaboratively. Everything from our folks who are preparing college students who are entering the workforce on best practices in child abuse, our trauma-informed prosecutor project that's helping prosecutors prosecute these cases with empathy and with the tools they need. Our internet crimes against children training, our folks on our team who've worked those cases and are training the next generation of ICAC detectives and investigators to make sure that people know how to get the right evidence that can get charged, that we can hold these offenders accountable. We have folks who are working with survivors, Survivor Space, which is a online space for adults who are abused as kids to get help, to get connection, along with 1 in 6 specifically towards male victims. And so there's so many. Our CEO Jeff Dien talks about it like there's a sky. There's all these different constellations. We're all in the sky together, and there's so many different folks sort of owning and working their area of constellation. Whether it's prevention, faith communities, whether it's prevention in with kids themselves, with make sure that kids have good curriculum about online internet safety, body safety. So we're all kind of working on our different pieces of the puzzle to chip away at child abuse, but just with the firm belief that we can get ahead of this, we can end child abuse. And it's something that when we're all working together and we have a plan, that it can happen.
Very good. And it's just interesting. We're having this conversation right now. We set up this meeting a couple of weeks ago, and I just, saw from last night too, there was that big Amber Alert that happened up in Zimmerman, Minnesota. So this is just so important that we're talking about this stuff right now, because it does happen and it's out there. So,
and a lot of people think about our work with the non-family abductions, which we do assist and advocate for families. But that, that's about 100 to 300 cases a year for those stereotypical kidnappings. But yet we have between 1 in 4, 1 in 6 children being abused in our country before they turn 18. A lot of them aren't that small niche population, but that's often where people meet us. And then we can give them more information about prevention, of what's more likely to happen, how to get ahead of, sending your kid to day camp in the summer. What are the questions you need to ask? What are the steps to take? Things that are more just sort of more day to day.
Okay. And what are some common myths people believe about abuse and exploitation that you wish that you could debunk?
I think that it happens to other people, that it happens to other families. I was working with a reporter who was doing a story on a horrible physical abuse child case. And the reporter said to me, but I drove by the house and it doesn't look like a house where physical abuse would happen. And I thought, well, tell me more about that. He's like, well, the house was a very nice house. The lawn was manicured. It was, and I drove by and I was like, I can't believe that physical abuse happened in such a nice neighborhood and such a nice home. And it's that misconception of people feeling like it's always happening somewhere else. It's always happening in another community. Child abuse, it's, all genders, all races, all socioeconomic groups, all cultures. We're all dealing with the mistreatment, maltreatment of kids. And it doesn't, and when we don't take on the fact that it's possible, we don't usually take on the responsibility of prevention. And so just that idea of owning the fact that child abuse can happen to our families, it can happen to people that we love. People that we love can be the person causing the harm. And so what are our steps? How can we get proactive? No one wants to think about it, which I totally respect. But we have to make child abuse prevention positive, manageable, empowering, not something that scares parents to death or scares kids to death, but gives them steps to take. And that's what we're really proud of. I remember when I started teaching internet safety back in 2001, the number one question I would get from parents is, should we get a computer? Like, should we get one? We've been going back and forth on the pros and cons. Right. We're not sure if it's a good idea for our family. I haven't heard that question in the last decade. The questions that we're asking are very different about how we keep kids safe on phones and online and with social media. So just that idea of being aware that there are people out there with really bad intentions, and how can we be proactively engaging with our kids, with our loved ones, to get ahead of that.
That's a direct correlation with the work that I do too, with, an active shooter or someone that is going to carry out this horrific event. And, a lot of people say, well, I don't think it would happen here, but you would be surprised, just like you're talking about, even a great company that's got a lot of money, their culture might not be the best inside of that building. So you just never know. They're happening everywhere, schools, churches, places of work. So that's fascinating that you bring up that part, and I'm glad that you do. If you could give parents and educators and caregivers 3 red flags to watch for, what would they be in your opinion?
The first one is isolation. We tell parents we want to build a safety net around kids. Who are the 5 adults that your child can talk to if they have a problem? Who are the 5 adults where if your child's having a bad day, they can go to? And we want to say 5 because sometimes it's the person on the net who's causing the harm, and we have 4 more people. Sometimes we're embarrassed to tell dad, but we might tell our soccer coach, whatever it is. We want to build our 5. And once that net is built, that safety net's built around our kids, we want to pay attention to anyone who's trying to separate our kids from that net. No one loves you but me. No one cares about you but me. And it could be a person in the net, but healthy adults, which is the majority, want to be one of many people supporting a child. They want to be one of 10 people at the school play. They want to be one of 10 people at the baseball game. Unhealthy people, they want to be it. They want to be the only one. It's about them. And so once we've built those nets, we want to pay attention to that isolating behavior. Who seems to like your kids more than you do? Who seems too good to be true? And that's horrible questions to ask. But once we've built that net, we want to pay attention to that isolating behavior, because offenders need time with kids, access to kids, in order to break their rules, right? And the more skill that they have in breaking a child's rules, the less time and access that they need. That's from the FBI Ken Landing's work, but he talks about time, access, skill. And the more skill that we have as parents, as educators, as kids, of paying attention to warning signs, the less time and access that they get with us before we say something. So the first thing is pay attention to isolation. The second thing is to not focus on how you know the person. It's not the relationship to the person that's the problem. It's the behavior of the person. Most of our cases of child abuse are by someone the child knows. Most of our cases of abduction, someone the child knows. It's over 95% of the time in both, it's almost always someone known to the child. So teaching your kids to be scared of people they don't know isn't helpful. when often it's people they don't know who are going to be their helpers if something happens. So it's not how do we know them? It's not teaching to be scared of people we don't know. It's what are they asking you to do? Are they asking you to break your safety rules? You know, if I'll have kids be like, what about white vans, Allison? What about white vans? I'm taught to watch for white vans.
Right.
It's like, there are wonderful people who drive white vans. But if someone who drives a white van is asking you to break your rules and they're asking you to get in the white van, that's a problem, right? So it's not, how do I know them? What are they asking me to do? We have to have family safety rules talked about, discussed, practiced, so that we're aware when we have those moments, right? And the best way to practice is with what-if scenarios. So it's not passive learning for kids, but kids are engaged in that learning. And then the third thing is to teach kids about their uh-oh feeling. And for adults to pay attention to their uh-oh feeling too. In a lot of our cases, parents will say afterwards, there was something about that person that just gave me the ick. Or there's something about that person that just seems so creepy. I could never put my finger on it. With little ones, it's like that mixing bowl feeling in your tummy. If someone makes you feel that way, I, as your parent, want to know about it. You don't have to have a good reason. If someone makes you feel that way as your partner, I want to know about it, right? If we're like at a family reunion, this person just gives you the ick and you can't figure out why, tell me so that you and I can make a plan to be extra cautious with our kid and not leave them alone as that person, right? So I would say to teach, to pay attention to isolation as parents, to not focus on how you know someone, but teach kids to focus on what they're asking you to do, and then to teach kids about their gut instinct. And then as parents, we don't have to have a logical reason for not leaving our kids with a person or in a place that makes us feel unsafe or uncomfortable. We have permission to listen to our own gut instinct as well.
Okay, with that, with the isolation, and I just want to make sure that I'm understanding this correctly. When people isolate people, they can have a much bigger influence on them because they don't have the other voices that could protect them at that time. And when you're talking about how do they know you, what are they asking? Do you have any statistic that you could just pull out as this, when these abuse things happen, is there a percentage of times it is someone that the child does know versus, like you said, the white van person that just off the street? Do you know, is there a percentage of how many times it is someone that's directly correlated with this child that does know them?
Yeah, over 95% of child abuse is with someone the child knows. And often, I don't have the statistic, but often likes. Like, I don't have the exact statistic, but it's someone who's worked their way into that child's life as a family member, a coach, a friend. And again, most people don't hurt kids. So I always need to frame that for my own brain and for, so I'm not, I want my child to explore life past the driveway. Scared kids aren't smarter kids. And that's something Patty always says. We don't want to scare kids to death because that makes them, that reduces their sort of safety smarts in those situations. So it's that idea of it's almost always someone that we know. Kids are more at risk by people we let into the house through our front door than the people they meet when they're going outside to play. And so we want to make sure that our rules cover both, that they cover those horrific, rare abductions. And so it's like, okay, you know what? Check first with me before you get in the car with anyone. If someone wants to get in the car, I want you to come and check first with me. I don't care if it's someone we know or someone we don't know. If grandma drives up and asks you to get in the car, come and tell me, because if I come outside and you've left with grandma and I don't know that, I'm going to freak out, right? So
Sure.
Everyone has the same rules. If a car drives by and tries to get you in their car, come and tell me. It doesn't matter if we know them or not. The rules are the same for everyone. So again, covering both the rare cases and the more common cases the same way. And once we've created a family safety rule, we then practice with what ifs to make sure that the kid really gets it. And we do those what ifs ongoing.
And then with that third part is that teach kids the uh-oh. And for us, that would be, as adults, that intuitive feeling where you have that intuition, that you have that gut feeling, the hair on the back of your neck stands up around this person. There's something telling you. And, the biggest things that when we teach this stuff is denial and logic are sometimes the biggest barriers to that intuition. And so you start to think, well, this person would never do that to that. And you start trying to use that logic and you start trying to use that denial to fight your intuitive feeling. That's, something that's sent through your vagus nerve. It's a biological response that's alerting you to danger. Why am I getting this feeling? So I love that you simplify that for kids, that, why am I getting that feeling, and to pay attention to that.
And to check in. If someone's giving you that feeling, you don't have to figure it out when you're a kid. And we think about that 11 to 17-year-olds are the age that's most often targeted with online crimes, with abuse, with things that get, that's a really high risk age is 11 to 17. And we think about the brain and what the brain is. 11 to 17, the brain is working to argue. It's learning how to argue. Those are the neurons that are firing. So our 11 to 17-year-olds are often arguing against their gut instinct because biologically, their brain is pushing back on any limits, any boundaries. And so we don't want to decrease the conversations as kids grow. We want to increase them and have even more conversations when kids hit those hard ages. And we can start coming from a place of empathy when kids are young and doing what ifs. But a lot of parents feel like, well, now my kid's 12, they're good. And it's like, that's when we need to really dig in and have more what if questions and have more conversations. Because they often, Gavin DeBecker, who's written a lot about gut instinct and The Gift of Fear is one of his books, Protecting the Gift. I like his stuff. A lot of people don't like his stuff. I like his stuff. It is dated. Like if you read The Gift of Fear, one of my college interns came out to me and says, he's talking about a pager in this book. What's a pager? And I was like, thank you. Thank you for reminding me of my age, right? So that idea of it came out pre-internet. There's a lot of dated references, but just the psychology of people when they're a victim of crime will often talk about having that feeling beforehand. And 11 to 17-year-olds will often argue their way out of that. Midsi Sanchez, who was 8 when she was abducted, and thankfully recovered alive, in a big part due to her own ability to get help from. That's a whole long story. But Midsi was interviewed as an adult about her abduction when she was 8, and she was walking home from school and someone was loading boxes into a car and had asked her to help, and she said something about him just made me feel really unsafe, really uncomfortable, but I didn't want to be a bad kid, so I helped him, and then he ended up abducting her in that process. And so that idea about giving our kids permission, if someone asks you to help them with something, come check in with me. If someone wants to go to their house, come check in with me. If someone wants to go in their car, come check in with me. You don't have to figure out as a kid what is a good idea, what isn't. Check in with me so that I can help you figure it out and I can help you figure out what's going on, right? And the more that we can practice with what ifs with our kids and those scenarios with, I would want to know. I wouldn't be mad at you. I'd be really glad that you told me, can help our kids have some of those harder safety conversations and just build it as a pattern.
Love that. And when you were saying that about Gavin DeBecker, I've read that book twice, and I love the part where he talks about the elevator scene where, an elevator will open up, a woman will look at a guy in that elevator, and it's just, there's something about him and the way he says something that gives her that gut feeling. And they may think with denial and logic, nothing's ever happened to me. The, statistics on this are so low, and then they'll enter into a steel trap with a man that's giving them this fear response. So I love that you're talking about that kind of stuff, because I firmly believe that we need to use our gut more of that. That is telling you through evolution of a fear response, a real fear response of things that are happening in your environment.
And how we're cultured in the Midwest to not push back often. And we look at with kids, like, you don't have to be nice to someone who creeps you out. You don't, come and tell me. You don't have to, I use an analogy with when we have the expanding child abuse prevention big initiative right now where we've created these great 4 curriculums that are for K through 12. We've trained over 300 teachers in Minnesota to deliver these curricula. They're being used in the schools. It's just something that we're super proud of. And in one of those lessons, we use the analogy of a soccer game. Like if you're playing soccer and you're a kid and a grown-up starts playing soccer with you and they don't know the rules, that could get dangerous because they're a grown-up and they don't know the rules. You don't have to explain the rules to them, because if you've ever tried to explain the rules to a grown-up when you're a kid, it doesn't usually go well. Get off the soccer field. Find one of the many adults who does know the rules and say, hey, this guy playing with us doesn't know the rules, right? It's that you don't want the child online to interact with the person who's not knowing the rules and freaking everybody out. You want them to get out of that moment and find a grown-up to help. But a lot of kids don't tell because they feel like they'll be blamed. They've done something wrong. And so the what ifs are so helpful because we can, reinstill with kids. I would want to know. I wouldn't be mad. We do focus groups. The junior high kids said they really like doing what ifs. But there are 2 things that they would like their parents to know if you're with junior highs. The first one is, please don't use real people's names because that creeps them out. Like what if your soccer coach, Mitch, sent you a nude photo and they're like, what's wrong with Mitch? Like, was he arrested? And we don't want to put like airs of suspicion on people who are just trying to do the right thing by our kids, and our kids like scared to go to soccer. So don't use real people's names, just use categories of people. What if someone in our faith community? What if some, and then the second thing is the junior high kid says, please don't make eye contact with us when having conversation about safety. And I was like, what? Like, I'm all about eye contact. And they're like, well, you can't think when your parent is looking into your soul, right? So that idea of like looking out the car window, or when you're shoveling, which I'm sure we'll be doing a lot of here in January in Minnesota, like do a what if, let them think about it while their hands are busy, while their brain is busy, and then they can come back to it. So just that idea about increasing those conversations as kids get older.
Excellent. And for you, how do we balance holding offenders accountable while still showing empathy to the victims and families? I know that's a tougher question, but what are your thoughts on that?
I think we have to rely on not our just what we think, but like what has worked, what do we know, what has research told us, right? We want to make sure that we have that balance. And one of the things that we do know is that often child molesters and people who abuse kids are people the child knows and likes. And one of the reasons they don't want to tell is they don't want to get that person in trouble. So we have to be careful as parents and as caregivers how we talk about offenders. If we say stuff like, if anyone ever did that to you, I'd bring them outside and I'd kill them, right? I'd shoot them in the backyard. The child doesn't want their uncle to die, and so we have to be careful how we talk about offenders, because, I'll often use the phrase in our curriculum and the work that we do with kids is, you know what? Most people know the rules about safety. Most people know if you meet someone who doesn't know the rules, you haven't done anything wrong. And you can tell me so that I can figure out what's going on, and we can make sure that that person knows the rules, or that they're not spending time with kids if they don't know the rules. And less about like, I'm going to kill this person, I'm going to shoot this person, because that isn't helpful for kids. And especially when, kids are disclosing because they want the abuse to stop, but they don't necessarily want this person to be harmed or killed or any of those kinds of things. So when we think about being victim-centered, it's thinking about honoring that child's story, honoring that child's experience, holding that offender accountable through the judicial process and through prosecution, but being aware that the earlier that an offender is caught, the younger that an offender is caught, the more likelihood that that person, if they're given interventions, aren't going to go on to harm other kids. And so knowing that there are resources, if your kid is exhibiting problematic sexual behavior, there are places, you can start with Stop It Now nonprofit that can get help before it becomes something that's really problematic. A lot of people wait till it's very far down the road before they say anything. And we want to use those moments early on for intervention. So I think how we talk about offenders, how we talk about behavior does impact if kids disclose or not. So we need to be aware that our words have power.
When you're speaking about that, it just brought something up where you were saying statistically about 95% of this is with someone that they know. So I could see that point where if you say, I'm going to do harm to someone 95% of the time, it is that person that they know. And I could see them shutting down that way. And I don't know if it's a direct correlation, but I could see it almost as, a young kid starts drinking at a young age, and their parents are saying, if I ever catch you drinking, you're going to be this and this. And they're starting to yell at them and punish them and tell them this is what's going to happen to you. So they never talk to the parent about it because they're so afraid of what the repercussions are going to be because of that, instead of, hey, I need some help here. I've been doing this. I'm going down the wrong path, where it'd be more comfortable having that conversation with them.
And we say that a lot. We see that a lot with online behaviors of kids. Anecdotally, high schoolers will say, well, I don't tell when someone's making really gross sexual comments in my phone because my parents will take my phone away.
Right.
I don't tell because I have no idea what my parents would do. And so I don't want to tell them because I just have no idea what they would do and I'm freaked out about it. So that again with what ifs, to say, what if someone's saying stuff online that really makes you feel uncomfortable? Here's the deal. I'd want to know about it. I wouldn't pull your phone away, but we'd work together to make it safer, and I wouldn't be mad at you, right? So some of those proactive conversations really helpful, but the level of disclosure rates when abuse is happening on phones and on laptops is very, very low. And I think a part of that, anecdotally, is that fear of what's going to happen. And the reporting rates to law enforcement, the reporting rates to even the internet service provider, the reporting rates to parents we see kids painted into corners online very, very quickly and being very, very worried to say something because they feel like it already feels shameful. It already feels embarrassing. And now they're going to be blamed. And now their parents never going to look at them the same way again. Right. So some of those conversations with our older kids about online safety, coming from that place of connection. And I think back years ago, working with the 3rd or 4th grader who had experienced child abuse. And somehow, I don't remember exactly how it came out. I didn't ask him, like, why didn't you tell? Because I know most kids don't tell. That's victim blaming. But we had a conversation about that in some way, and I don't remember the context. But I remember his little face looking at me, goes, well, I didn't tell my parents because they didn't know anything about sex. I was like, probably they do. Probably they do, but he's like, they've never brought up anything about bodies or any of that stuff. And so I figured it was just something that he taught me, and I didn't want to be in charge of teaching that to my parents. Right. And like, think of this little guy who has it on his shoulders, like, I don't want to be the sex educator in my family. And and child abuse isn't, I want to be careful here because I'm not like folks who do sex ed is a different lane than people who do child safety. Those are two different things. So I want to stay in my lane, but just that sense of like teaching kids about their bodies, teaching kids the real names for body parts, letting them know about private parts. And we don't use good touch, bad touch anymore when we talk about this stuff because we found that kids who've been taught that curriculum are less likely to tell because they feel like they've been bad. I've been touched a bad way. I'm bad. I need to cover it up, especially our 3rd, 4th graders. That's just, they take that on. And so we don't say, is it good or bad? If anyone is wanting to touch your private parts, as your parent, I want to know about it. Or as your, and here's the deal. There are times when a grown-up might touch kids' private parts to keep them clean and healthy. But if they're touching your private parts to keep you clean and healthy, you can ask anyone you want to about it, and it's not a secret. And you can check in. If you're at the doctor's office and they say, I'm going to check private parts now and make sure that they're clean and healthy, there should be a nurse there. There's a doctor there. We can ask questions. It's not a secret. I should know that it's happening. It's something that we all talk about together. We want to really reduce secrecy, especially around safety. We don't keep secrets about safety. And we also want to make sure that kids know about touches. We don't ask other people to touch their private parts. If someone's touching our private parts, we can tell. And if it is a time where someone's trying to keep you clean and healthy, we can ask a lot of questions because mom might be helping us in the bath. Great. They're keeping us clean and healthy. But if mom's helping us in the bath and it doesn't feel clean and healthy, who can we ask? Who can we talk to? Right. And so, just normalizing some of those conversations before there's ever a problem, because I think back, and I don't want to go too much on a tangent, but I was watching my friend from college. I was watching her 2 boys were at the park, and the little one looked at me and he's like, my uncle's a really, he's doing some really bad things. And I was like, oh no, like it's a Saturday. It's with my friends' kids. Now we're going to be doing a disclosure. We're going to be calling mandated, like we're going to be making a report. This is, and I'm just thinking this poor kid. And I looked at him and I said, oh, tell me more about that. Eye contact, compassion. And he said, well, he has our family Netflix password and he's sometimes watching R-rated movies with our Netflix. And I was like, oh, anything else that he's doing that you want to tell me about? He's like, no, but that's a really big deal. And I was like, well, thanks for telling me about that. Do you want me to talk to your mom about the Netflix password, see if we can get him his own stuff, his own accounts here? Those R-rated movies aren't, yeah, that would just be so good. And it ended up being literally that. But the fact that we had that moment, we had that conversation, if something did happen 2 years down the road, he knows that he can talk to me about it because I'm going to come to it with compassion and care, right? So sometimes what our kids are really worried about may not be a big worry for us. Like, how they're doing in some contest at school or whatever else might not be our biggest worry. But when we meet them with compassion and ask them about their feelings, that builds those loyalty bridges. So that 2 years or 3 years down the road, they say, well, they listened about this when I didn't feel safe. And help me make a plan. Like I was scared on the first day of school and they helped me make a plan for that. I'm going to tell them that this person at school makes me feel really unsafe, right? So it's about those ongoing moments, those little moments.
I really like when you said that. And just like with the online conversations, it's not taking in taking their phone away and they might have been in one of these bad situations, but you're not taking the phone and computer and tablet away. You're having a conversation about it and having them open up more, because like you said, that's so important that if this happens again, now they can have that same conversation. They're trusting that things are going to be handled well and that you're not just going to punish them for what they have with that activity in all different facets. So that's really good.
And the number one reason kids send out sexual pictures when we do our training on sexting and sextortion is they do it because they feel like that they are being coerced. They have no other choice. Like they'll say no to a request 2-3 times and then they'll comply because they feel like they don't have other choices, which is a whole nother conversation about no stands alone. You don't need the word because after the word no. And if someone isn't listening to a no, to get an adult to help you or to find resources to help you. But just that idea of the number one reason kids send sexual pictures, they feel like they have no other choice. And then when we vilify them because they feel like they have no other choice, then their idea, we have to teach kids about consent so they can recognize coercion. We have to teach them what consent is. Like, guess what? The dog gets to feel safe in its body when it's in our house, so we don't pull the dog's tail. Like, your friend fell off the side of the playground, see if they want a hug or if they need their space. Like, we need to have those conversations about consent so that when kids are older and they're feeling this coercion of, I will only date you, or, I mean, that's not the words that they're using, but like, I'll only spend time with you if you send me this sexual picture. I was just starting to like you, and now you're not sending me a sexual picture. Why are you being, those kinds of conversations. The child needs to understand this isn't okay. This coercion isn't okay, and I didn't do anything wrong. And kids who understand consent it's more easy to identify this coercive behavior. And we don't want to victimize them when they come forward and ask for help.
Okay. And where do you see systems failing survivors, and what do you think needs to change with that?
I think just traditionally, the criminal court system isn't set up to be victim friendly. It's not the victim going after the offender. It's the state going after the offender. And so the victim tends to not have a lot of voice or rights in the process of if a case is going to be charged or not, as to if they need to testify or not. So I think the idea of, training prosecutors as we do with the process, making sure that prosecutors are trauma informed, making sure judges are trauma informed. I've loved spending time at the judges conferences in the past. Making sure that law enforcement is trauma informed, making sure that people in the medical profession are trauma informed, because our kids are interacting with a lot of different folks, and the idea of having a multidisciplinary team, which I should have called out. Our agency trains forensic interviewers in the Child First Protocol and does phenomenal work in helping people do that, those fact-finding interviews. Those working with multidisciplinary teams to do those Child First interviews so that the child only has to tell their story once and everyone hears the story at once, right? So there are things that we've learned, that we continue to learn, that we say, having a dog, like a specially trained dog to sit next to a child in the courtroom when a child's testifying. We found that that's super effective. That helps give kids a voice and allowing that to happen in court. So when we find things that work for kids, to then making those things accessible nationally, that's a big part of, what has worked, what is effective. Okay, let's replicate that and let's listen to victims and have them be the experts in their story.
Excellent. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I love that part about the dog. My mom used the same thing in speech therapy just to work with kids that didn't really want to talk. And she would introduce a dog into the room and then they would start talking to the dog. And then you would lead on to them opening up. And I think that's such an effective tool. So I love that. And that segues right into my next question is, how can law enforcement, schools, and communities work better together to prevent abuse before it happens?
I think just acknowledge that abuse can happen, and be proactive about prevention. And prevention means giving kids good information about online and body safety, giving parents good information, and giving the people who interact with the kids, youth serving organizations, teachers, and to make sure that that education is accurate, is current, is positive, gives a lot of physical steps that people can do, not just child abuse happens. And I remember TAing a class when I was getting my master's about sex crimes, and that day was just so horrific. It was such a horrific, the case study that we're doing was horrific. Whatever. Two of the guys leaving the room one of them looks at the other guy, they're college students, like, oh, what are you doing tonight? And one boy's like, I think I'm going to go home and chop off my penis after this lecture today. Like, this is horrible, and that's not where we need to be when we're talking about prevention. There's room at the table for those guys to say what works, what's helpful, there's room for everyone at the table. And we need to make that table bigger when it comes to what works, and centering voices with lived experience, centering people with disabilities who are at a much higher rate to be victimized, and what is, giving them opportunities to educate us on what is more helpful. Anytime that we can make a wider table for more people to get involved in prevention, and when we find out specific things that work, like having a therapy dog in court, for example, or there's so many different strategies that we found to be helpful for kids, then replicating them and making sure that everyone has access to what works, so that it's not, well, if you live in this county, you'll be served well because they've been trauma informed and they've gone through training, they have resources. But if you get abused in this county, good luck. We want these things that are helpful to be accessible to law enforcement and to folks in the criminal justice system, so that all kids get good services. And our agency was founded in part because Victor Veith, who's our founder, was a child abuse prosecutor, and was finding that people who were prosecutors, they're given the child abuse cases sort of until they knew what they were doing, and then they would get the real adult cases, right? Like, this is your training ground. And he wanted it to be flipped around. He wanted to make sure that the best of the best were prosecuting the case with the kids. And so that's, the National Child Protection Training Center, and his work with attorneys and making sure that people had the resource that they need. And it's about equipping those in the field doing the work, so that they're not burning out, because this high burnout work that we do, that they have information, they have good supports when it comes to vicarious trauma. And vicarious trauma isn't about a bubble bath. It's about, do you have PTO? Do you have a supervisor you can talk to when a case is hard? And so just that idea of a lot of good people in the field get burned out when we don't take vicarious trauma seriously.
Good point. And can you share, I'm kind of putting you on the spot here, but can you share a success story or moment that reminded you why this work matters so much?
One of my favorites, I love working with young people, and I'm in the schools all the time doing prevention ed. And every time I think I've heard every question, a child will raise their hand, and I'm like, oh, no, that's new. But I was with third graders, and we were talking about empathy, because if we don't want to raise more offenders, we need to raise people who don't want to cause harm, right? And that's a big piece of interrupting the culture where kids are harmed and where peers are harmed, is by creating kids who don't want to cause harm. And so we're talking about this study, with these little ones, about the more that you read, we found that kids who read a lot of books tend to have higher empathy scores. And I asked the kids, I asked it in their words, not in my words, but like, why do you think that is? That the more that kids read, the higher their empathy scores? And kids are raising their hand, and they're like, oh, because you learn about different cultures. You learn about different ways that people see the world. You put yourself in someone else's shoes. It's easy to end. And this little guy raised his hand, and I called him. He looked at me with these big eyes. He said, Miss Allison, I just don't want to be the bad guy in someone else's story.
Wow.
And I just melted into a puddle on the ground. Like, this little guy, I just don't want to be the bad guy in someone else's story. We spend so much time telling people to say no, to be hard on the target. Like, this is what you need to know. This is why if someone's acting this way online, say no. Like, we forget to flip it over and be like, don't cause harm to your friends. Like, don't be that person who's asking for that sexual picture 3 times. Like, right. And it starts young with not just teaching kids about their right to say no without a because after it, but flipping that around and saying, what does it mean to be a good friend? And if we're seeing someone being harmed, what does it mean to be a bystander or to be an upstander? What does it look like to stand up when we see harm? And let's practice, because that's really important for me and our family, that if someone's being harmed, you can go, and when you're in 2nd grade, you can go get a grown-up. That's not tattling if hurting is happening. Like, there's a lot of problems kids can handle on their own, but if someone's being hurt or threatening to hurt you, I want you to get someone who's a helper. And if the first person can't help, keep finding someone until they can. So that idea of not just teaching kids to reduce their possibility of victimization, teaching kids not to be that one causing the harm, and what to do when we see someone being harmed, what it means to stand up.
That's excellent. And I love that story you shared with that little guy doing that. I'm sure that was a powerful moment that you still remember. And it's just interesting that we can remember those emotional moments and we can draw on them just like that. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Kids give me so much hope. Kids give me so much hope. I'll get so frustrated about the work and so frustrated about, then I'll spend time with the class of junior high kids and I'll leave just being like, yes, we're good. We're good.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So how can people support, and the listeners that are listening here, how can they support the Zero Abuse Project or get involved?
Yeah, they can go to zeroabuseproject.org. There's very easy ways to donate, which is one thing that we're always asking, for additional resources to do the work. But also, if if your teachers in the school district that you're in want prevention ed that's accessible and is effective, they could reach out to us and learn more about the expanding child abuse prevention curriculum. And we have the curriculum that we have for little ones is called Empower Me. Then our junior high and senior high curriculums are called Smart Not Scared. So, being a champion of getting prevention ed in your school. If you're in a civic group or at a business, we can come and do a lunch and learn about, what are the things that you need to know about internet safety. If you're someone who cares about kids, what are things that you know about? How do we teach kids? We do a class about talk about touches. How do we teach kids about bodies? How do we do that in a way that's effective? Bring a speaker in to do a Zoom or to do an in-person lunch and learn. So if you see something that's helpful, whether it's, the Jacob Wetterling Resource Center Facebook page or the Zero Abuse Project Facebook page, if you see an article, if you see some knowledge there that's really helpful to you as a parent, to share it on your own page. And when you see a child who's missing, to share those on your pages, right? So there's little things that can be done of awareness. There's really big things that can be done when it comes to being an interrupter. If you're seeing behavior that puts kids at risk in your faith community, in your serving organization, in your family, get resources. You don't have to push back alone.
And because I know this is one of the big things is youth sports is so huge right now. Do you guys do things where you do the youth sport talks where maybe you come out and do that? Because there's a lot of one-on-one time sometimes with adults in there with the locker rooms, and do you do things like that where you would come out and do a quick presentation for the parents and the kids?
We do trainings for youth sports. I found though that youth sports are like 10 steps ahead, in my opinion, of often like dance companies, theater companies, arts organizations. I feel like nationally, there's been a big push with safe sport and with national work, like soccer, USA Soccer, with USA Swimming, where it's like, if you are going to be in our club, you need to do this. Here, we, as the national org, are going to give you these rules, these resources. I feel like sports are 10 steps ahead often. And I'm someone who loves the arts and loves the arts communities, but arts communities and faith communities tend to be, I think, farther behind sports. And I love training anyone who needs it, but I love training dance companies and arts companies, theater companies, because I feel like anyone who has interactions with kids are going to have the opportunity to change lives. And it could be for the better, as it usually is, or it could be someone who's toxic. And what do you do when you have a toxic volunteer? What do you do when you have a toxic staff member, right? So I feel like sometimes just an anecdote, my child wanted to take dance, and I spent like 3 hours calling around trying to find a dance company that trains and screens their staff, and I couldn't find one. And thankfully I eventually found one. But just that idea of when there's not like a national organization, but each person is on their own, I feel like they culturally are kind of are catching up when it comes to prevention. And some arts companies are great about it. Some dance companies are great about it. Some faith communities are great about it. But in general, those are three areas that I'm very passionate about trying to get those three groups caught up, because those were the places I liked spending my time the most when I was a kid, was at dance and at theater and at church. Those were my three places. And I just have a passion for equipping those places to be healthy places.
Fantastic. And how can people get a hold of you, Alison?
ZeroAbuseProject.org. You can click there. There's places to get training. There's our advocacy phone number. If you talk to one of our staff advocates, is 1-800-325-HOPE. You can call that number and we can put you in touch with an advocate. But yeah, you can go to request a trainer or reach out to us for advocacy. I live and work in St. Paul, and I'm in central Minnesota quite a bit. And yeah, I'm very thankful that I get to do a lot of prevention all over the place, but it's always more fun to do it in Minnesota because I don't have to get on a flight, and childcare is much easier when that's happening in Minnesota. So love spending time here doing prevention.
Fantastic. And if you had one final message you'd like to leave with our listeners today, what would that be?
Patty Wetterling always used to say that hope is a verb. It's not used to say, like she still says it. Hope is a verb. If we want to hope that the world is better, we got to roll up our sleeves and get to work. Hope isn't passive. We don't hope for kids by laying back and just, passively hoping things get better. It's about rolling up your sleeves and finding action steps to do that. And so that's been something in my life. I see hope as such a powerful word. When Jacob was taken, Doug Wood wrote a song called Jacob's Hope. And one of the verses was, there's a dream that we dream how the world should be, where children are safe, where children are free. But if we know that this should happen, we must make it so, for we are Jacob's hope. And I just think that idea of hope is a verb. We need to do this. We need to own this. This is up to the kids to figure this out. This is grown-ups create these problems. Grown-ups need to fix these problems, and to own our place in prevention and to find a seat at the table when it comes to what prevention looks like in your community.
Fantastic. I love that. And you have that whole quote down. That is fantastic. All right. Alison, thank you so much for your time, your honesty, and the work you are doing every single day. The impact you are making through the Zero Abuse Project truly matters. And I hope our listeners walk away today more aware, more empowered, and more willing to step in when something does not feel right. To everyone listening, prevention starts with us. It starts with paying attention, having uncomfortable conversations, and creating environments where people feel safe to speak up. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. These are conversations that save lives. And to our Iron and Empathy community, thank you for showing up and being a part of these meaningful discussions. Remember, iron sharpens iron, but empathy keeps us human. We will see you next time.